Hello, I'm Thibaut de Ruyter, the curator of the Feinheinz Show, an exhibition that will open on June 17 in Krasnoyarsk as one of the exhibitions of the Museum's Biennale that will also start on that day. And I'm going to now briefly introduce you the exhibition project and also the format of what we are doing for those conversations, because I really want it to be a conversation and kind of a strange moment because we're going to discuss about artworks and artists and works that are not produced yet, but that are under production. And it's kind of the key of the exhibition. So first, I want to give you a few words about what we are doing. Then you will hear Brendan Howell, which is one of the artists of the exhibition, who will have a conversation with Aleksandr Mikhailov, who is his, let's say, partner in Siberia on the production of the exhibition. And also Anastasia Bezvershuk, which is my direct contact there, will join us for the conversation at the end of this 1 hour sequence. The Feinheinz Show is an exhibition that came out during the last month. It was, of course, as you can imagine, one of those very difficult projects we all had to deal during the year 2020. And when it became kind of obvious that I can't curate there a normal or traditional biennale, what I call traditional biennale means inviting several artists from the whole world to go to Krasnoyarsk, to spend some time all together and to develop new projects for the city. I had to find some kind of option as a curator to still do something which will be a real exhibition. Many people went on the internet, many people went on PDFs or on websites. We are now also online on YouTube, but I really wanted to have a real exhibition. And what came back to my mind is a story from 1971. So it's quite beautiful because it's exactly 50 years ago. So we celebrate now some kind of birthday of an exhibition that happened in New York. The exhibition was called Pier 18. And it was in the beginning, or not in the beginning, but kind of the peak of conceptual art in America, where one curator, who was also a critic, invited 20 artists to write on very small pieces of paper instructions for a photographer to go and do some kind of photographs on a very famous location in New York, the so-called Pier 18. What was very interesting is that some of the artists who wrote those instructions went on the pier and performed in front of the photographer, but others didn't even came. And they just sent ideas or principles or strategies, any kind of instructions, and they sent that to the photographer, who suddenly was just left with one piece of paper and made photos for John Baldessari, for Lawrence Wiener, for Daniel Buren, for like really 20 of the key artists of the history of conceptual art. And that exhibition, I always felt as a curator, was a different way of doing exhibitions. It was a totally different approach also to what is art, or how art is authorshiped, or who is the author of the artwork. So we discussed all of that, and the solution with which I came was to say, let's find in Berlin, which is the city where I live, and even if the cafes are closed, and even if the bars are closed, and the restaurants are closed, and we're not supposed to meet, you still can walk outside and have a conversation with people. Let's ask about 30 artists from Berlin to deliver instructions to Krasnoyarsk for the production of real artworks, of existing artworks. We're not going to transport anything, we're not going to transport anybody. And we're going to have a project where, on one hand, people in Berlin invent stories, sometimes very simple, sometimes very complex instructions. And on the other hand, in Krasnoyarsk, people do those works. And the biggest difference with the original project of 1971, or there's two differences. In 1971, the exhibition was to show how much conceptual art is an essential and the avant-garde movement from the 70s. Here, I wanted to show that Berlin as a city is a city where you have painters, where you have sculptors, where you have sound artists, where you have younger people and older people, where you have people from Israel or the United States or France, which is, by the way, where I'm coming from. I'm sure you heard that from my accent. So to have those origins of different people from different countries, but also of different genres. If you have been participating to the previous lectures or conferences we did here, you might have heard that we had already a person making installation, Barbara Breitenfellner. We had a sculptor, Gloria Tsain. We had last week Maru Mushtrieva, which is more going in the direction of games and poetry, and games are going to be a big topic today, I think. So it was important to show that thing on one hand, and on the other hand, I felt important not to say one single person in Siberia produces all the artworks. In 1971, it was really a photographer who got those images and who got those instructions and who did those images. Here, this year, what we do is that some of the instructions are going to do by professionals. Some of the instructions are going to be done by kids. Some of the instructions are going to be done by the mother-in-law of some friends of the people working in the museum. Some of the instructions can be done by the visitors. So at the end, we have like about 30 artists in Berlin for probably 100 producers in Siberia. And that's where Anastasia was totally essential, because she received those instructions and found people like Alexander to help us in the production of those projects. So here we're going to have kind of more like a biennale story, something more open, not to say like conceptual art is what should be done today, and also not to say like you need to be very talented or to be very skilled to produce something. Producing art can also be sometimes just a toy, a game, or something very funny. And I think today also we're going to speak a lot about games. So I'm going to introduce you briefly, Brendan. We met a few years ago on another exhibition I was working on the question of artificial intelligence. We will come back to that exhibition later. So Brendan is American, and he will be part in the exhibition of what I will call the new media artists. New media in the sense that, of course, today the digital world, the internet world, and all those things are a very important part of our life. And maybe we will hear that later when Brendan will explain his project, but we will build for him a computer that is a very amazing computer because it works without electricity. It's extremely nice for the environment. It doesn't cost any electricity. But maybe first, Brendan, if you could introduce your practice, tell us a bit where you're coming from and what are your what's your everyday life in your studio and what you're doing and how do you approach, of course, now this provocation with new media art. How do you deal with this kind of world? Brendan?
Okay, thank you. So I call myself an artist and a reluctant engineer, and I should probably explain that. I mean, I think most people have some idea of, or they maybe even know people who identify as artists, but when I call myself a reluctant engineer, it maybe sounds like I'm lazy. I mean, I guess some days that's true, but for the most part, when I say that, what I really mean is that I have some problem. I mean, engineers have built an awful lot of things, have been involved with a lot of projects over the last couple hundred years, and some of them are a bit problematic. And so my problem isn't necessarily with technology, with machines. I love playing with this stuff, learning about new techniques and building machines, but sometimes I have some issues with the way they get used. And recently, I guess, I'm more upset about some of these big companies that are involved with these things, who sort of use engineering to basically tell the rest of us how we should live our lives. So I guess one of the areas I can show you here, let me share this PDF, and I can show you a few things. So I guess the way I deal with a lot of these subjects is I want to play with the mythology of technology. So I make a lot of, you often build machines, and for a while I started off making a sort of mythology, a fake company, and I showed some of. So here, this machine was a joke machine. So it was for managers in the 1950s, and you could push a button and it would generate a new joke. And the jokes generally didn't make much sense, but sometimes they were funny because they were just so absurd. But it was a way of using really primitive techniques to play with language. This one was a kind of, you can see, and I was playing also with the design, with the marketing, with this whole culture around technology, the way we like to think of technology. And this one was based on sort of mind control for the home, so that you could use the same techniques that the CIA used, but to train your children to behave better, or to convince yourself to be more happy with work, or something like that. So here was one in electric triangle. So I'm interested in a lot of these. I guess people accuse me of nostalgia a lot, and definitely I'm guilty of that. But I try to practice this nostalgia with a kind of, I hope, a sort of healthy irony that means I'm not just saying in the past everything was great. I'm saying more like, well, things now are problematic, and in the past they were maybe problematic too. Maybe if we look at it through a historic lens, we can see some of this. So I guess, Thibaut, did you want me to show the stuff that we started working on?
I mean, I can introduce you. You don't want to show more of your previous works. You were very quick now. You can also show us one or two projects that you really cherish.
Sure. No, I can show a few more. Let's see here. So this one here is another one where I was playing with language. It doesn't look like much. You can see on the top, it's a table with a bunch of files. But this was a reference to the Cabinet Noir, which was this sort of secret office in the 17th century in France, where they would open up posts of people who were suspected of maybe conspiring against the king. And so I was interested in this topic of paranoia, that I felt like there were these things coming out. This was around the time when the Snowden, these things came out. And so I wanted to make a machine that would act like a sort of paranoid archive. And so I was producing a group exhibition with a bunch of other artists, and I took all of the private emails that we were sending to each other, and then wrote a sort of a program which would make it combined some old literature from Edgar Allan Poe, and which was about people hiding secrets in plain sight. And so this desk here was this sort of paranoid archive where you could see bits of the things that we were talking about with the exhibition, but then there were also these bits of this old detective story, and they were sort of mixed together. Here's another one that's maybe, I guess, at the time it didn't feel as nostalgic, but now it looks very nostalgic. But this was called the Infinite Contemporaneity Device. And the idea was so the mouse that you see there, it's actually I built a giant fiberglass model of a classic Microsoft scroll mouse. And so you could sit on the mouse. It's about 1.5 meters long. You would sit on the mouse, and then you would scroll. And then as you scrolled, there was this sort of tunnel projection on the wall that would go through headlines, news headlines. It would get more and more up to date as you scrolled faster. And then at some point, the tunnel would sort of be flashing in front of your eyes, and you would be getting the real-time feed of what people were saying on Twitter.
Are you more a software or a hardware designer? Do you relate more to, like, because you mentioned programming, and maybe we're going to speak about that later also. Do you see a practice, or hardware, software?
I mean, as an engineer, I think I love to build machines. Like I can't stop myself. If I have the luxury, then I'm going to make something that acts like, and that is sort of conceptually a bit like a machine, that has something about its behavior that's machinic. I mean, this one here is I tried to make a a DJ mixing deck for text. So the idea is that you would have two texts, and then I invited different sort of actors or readers to then try to read these texts. So I would mix, you know, classic hip hop texts with, I don't know, the Communist Manifesto, or with sort of Dadaist poetry and things like that. And I had some different algorithms for mixing the texts. And then you could do sort of crossfades and control how fast it was going. And it was kind of a fun performative thing. But for me, the art, at least my part of the art, was less performative. It was more about building the machine.
And another very stupid question is, as an engineer, so it means like your studies are not art studies at all. I mean, what did you study really, or what's your background?
Right. I guess I should have maybe explained that at the beginning. So I did my undergraduate. I have a bachelor's degree in electrical and computer engineering, and I did a lot of professional work for years with sort of network stuff, or with web and internet related technologies. But yeah, I also practice, you know, I teach in a university, and then I also, to make money, I do a lot of sort of techie things for example, I build a lot of interactive exhibitions for the German Railway Museum. So they're a good customer. That's what I enjoy that work a lot, but it's, you know, it's very applied. I can be somewhat creative, but it's mainly about making something that's really reliable. So I still use this sort of engineering knowledge for that. And then I did a master's degree in fine arts and studio arts. But I'd started doing some video work and some conceptual work when I was still studying engineering. But then when at some point I said, no, I want to be able to call myself a real artist as well. But I never got into painting or any of the more conventional things. I always stuck to this, using these technical skills as my main media. So this, yeah.
Go ahead, please. Sorry.
Okay, so I was just going to say, this one here was, I did some other work. I guess I always have had a certain sort of literary orientation, so working with text a lot, not always, but a lot. And this was a series of works I did where I made a kind of machine for, it was a kind of strange editor. So we would get together in groups of writers, and we would sit and write. And the machine would then edit the texts and put it together. And there was one, the biggest one we did was we worked for 5 days, for a whole week in London. And the machine edited together all the texts into a novel, which we then published.
I think maybe text is a nice introduction to the next story, which is how we met. Because it's text-based, and it's also gonna introduce the project you designed or you invented for Krasnoyarsk. So I think it was like 5 years ago or something like that. I was asked by the gallery Eigen Art in Berlin to curate an exhibition for their project space. And the only thing they wanted was to have something that dealt with the question of computers and electronics, and a kind of like artificial intelligence as a very vague subject, because it was at that time, and it's still today, a very important topic. I came up with an exhibition which was very few artists, but all were linked with some idea, more or less like the moment where artificial intelligence went crazy, or the moment where computers are going mad, and how artists can play out of that, or what's the stories artists are able to tell us. Of course, here you see an artwork now on the screen from Eric Bunger, and it's an artwork where he deals with HAL 9000, the computer of 2001 Space Oddity. But in the exhibition, you also had an artwork on Deep Blue, which was the famous computer from IBM who won a chess game against Garry Kasparov. And that was a revolution because for the first time ever, a computer was winning against the humankind. There's a lot of stories about how the computer won, but we're not going to speak about that now. Still at that time, we decided with the gallery to make a catalog, and I felt like how kind of stupid it was to make a catalog on a digital exhibition, which will just be a printed matter that people will get and forget. And I proposed the gallery to work on a website. And I started to look not for a normal website designer, but for some people who could also make an artistic proposal. And that's how I met Brendan, because some friends of mine said, oh yeah, if you look for somebody who has strange ideas on this kind of like computing, writing, blah, 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 you should contact him and he might do something for you. And what you see now on the screen is the catalog of the exhibition. So that catalog is online. The catalog is still there and will stay there as long as we host it on the internet. And the catalog has different sections on each of the artists. It has a bit of more material that also Brendan proposed. Because the whole exhibition was very 1980s based. It has this early internet aesthetic, which I really like. And I think you spoke about nostalgia before, and that's also part maybe about that nostalgia. But what's very important with that website, and that's what I loved with you, is that you see two columns. You have a theme column on the left and a big column in the middle. The theme column of the left are texts that I wrote, either the press release of the exhibition or short introductions about the artists or some material to read further about the topics of the exhibition. And then you have this central column where I think that we should go, can we go back to the press release, the main page, Brendan, maybe? So what's happening in that middle column is that all the text, and that was not my idea, it was you, I'm speaking for you, Brendan, now. The central column are the real texts that are to be found on the website, but rewritten by the computer. So a computer runs and something which is called the Markov algorithm, and that's all what you're going to speak after. But what's very interesting is that this central column is rewritten by the computer, putting kind of the words of my text in a more or less random order, but still trying to follow some kind of grammatical structure, which is why you get some sentences, like the first one I try to read now, and I'm apologizing for the translators. Ecological, political, economic, or were at the same time. We regarded Deep Blue, the first scientists that they can think, they involve, surround us, and documentation of science and generative surprises. That sentence makes no sense at all, and it's totally ridiculous. Still, what's quite funny on one hand is that it's representative of many texts that we can read in art magazines. It fits quite well to the globish English of the art world. And on the other hand, what's beautiful is that now, Brendan, if you refresh the page, what people might see, and I think it's an interesting moment, the text you had before is already gone because that website, and I think it's every 45 seconds, is it? So, yeah. So every 45 seconds, the whole website is being rewritten. The computer changes the whole text. So it means also the links are changed. And what you find once there, you will never find a second time. So maybe now it's interesting for you, Brendan, if you could introduce your project and speak about Markov, because so that's how we met. That's how I felt like you could propose something for Siberia. And when I came to you, you didn't just came back with some website project, but you came back with the whole computer that we are now building in Siberia. And that computer has also to deal with this Mr. Markov. And it would be lovely to hear more about that project if you can.
Okay. Maybe I should show the
PDF.
The PDF. So let's do that. Okay. So I need Goethe. So the idea here was to, at least there was something that I started quite a few years ago and sort of put it aside. But there was this thing I had about rustic computing, and I was thinking a lot about how all the talk around the computer and use of the computer and the sort of the pop cultural idea of it was about it as being this thing about efficiency and optimization. And at the same time, there were a lot of people I knew who were into food, and they were into this thing they were calling slow food and stuff like that. And I was thinking about how maybe it would be nice, maybe that's part of the problem with a lot of our computer culture, is that it's too fast. You know, everything is about doing everything as fast as and efficiently as possible. So what if we had a new idea of computing that was meant to be done more for the pleasure of it? You know, so you're computing in a way you like it, in the same way that people, you know, realize that sure, it's much faster to go to some fast food restaurant and it's less work and it might be efficient in some definition of that word. It's not going to be as pleasant. You won't enjoy it. And so people do things that, you know, making your own bread, it takes a long time, but people really like it. And it's somehow, it feels different and you have more involvement with all the process. So I thought maybe we can do something like that with the computer. And so I started playing around, making things, trying to make switches and stuff out of wood. And then it got really much too complicated. And I ran out of time and had to do other more important things. And so I put it aside. So then when Thibaut came and said that he wanted to do something in this very special, and honestly, I'm really grateful. This has been a lot of fun. Working with everyone involved, this special concept of how the works will get produced and realized, and it fits a lot to a lot of the topics that I like to work with, and also the ways of working. So anyway, to come back to this rustic computing, so I thought, okay, maybe I can come up with some rules so that we can do something high tech, but where you don't actually need the digital stuff. We can do it in a way that's kind of low tech. And so Andrei Markov was a Russian mathematician. He was super important. I mean, almost all of modern statistics, which are also the basis of most of the sort of the hip AI things that people are talking about now, they're based on his theories of discrete chains of events. It's not so important to go into the details of that, but his theory was really important. And it was very interesting that when he was developing these theories, he needed some kind of data to work with. He wanted something that he could start with. And usually when we think of statistics and mathematicians, that they would work with very dry, purely numerical data. And the interesting thing is that he decided to go with Pushkin, that he actually took the text of, what is it called, Evgeny Onegin, and use that as his sort of testing data set for developing his theories. So I always found that kind of interesting, and well, it made the whole thing seem more poetic and less about this sort of Platonic or rational ideal. So this is a technique then that I thought we could apply here, but I needed some kind of we can show you some of the bits of the PDF here. We needed a way to make it work, and we also needed a data set. So I didn't want to take Pushkin, I wanted to do something different. And I looked on my bookshelf, and then I thought, that a few years ago I was interested in sort of modernist poetry, and I had I bought an anthology translated to English. Unfortunately, I don't speak Russian, but of Anna Akhmatova. And this was, to me, it seemed like a chance. Okay, I'm doing something. I'm almost like a tourist. I'm sending something to Siberia, so maybe this is a chance to then work with this material, and for me to, like, at least from afar, try and learn more there. So I used some of her poems as the data source. So basically, what the machine does is you have here. So these are the rules. This guy has a good beard, Thibaut. You were asking about beards earlier, maybe. But here's the linguistic lookup table. So you go through these words are all from Anna Akhmatova, and they are based on the likelihood that they will occur next to each other in any of her poems. Now, I had to reduce this, obviously, an awful lot. So in a way, it's a very strange way of cutting her poetry down to something almost like a skeleton. But I think the results are pretty interesting. They still have, I don't know if they really have the same voice, but it's definitely true to what she wrote, at least. Now, we also have to, I think, be honest about the fact that I took these translations and then I put this table here. So because of the way the language then gets distorted, I think it's going even further away. So I don't know. That's something I can talk about with Aleksandr later. If he feels like it really reflects, if it sounds like her voice still when it's gone through this machine. But here's the image of.
But when you speak about machine, and I think now we should say a bit what will be there for the visitors? What's going to happen exactly? Because you're showing him some tables, some rules, so it's clearly a game. But so as a visitor in 2 weeks and a half, I come to the museum, and what will I see or what will I get to deal with from your instructions, basically?
So the idea is that we have, that the people behave like the computer, that they are playing various different roles in the sort of program. And so I defined these 4 roles here. I called one person the program counter. They're a little bit like the boss, I guess. They're the one who makes sure that everything is going in the appropriate order. And then I also suggested that they should make sure to, have some breaks for tea, or if people want to go outside or something like that, that they're sort of a management role, but, but it's supposed to be, it's rustic. It should be more pleasant, convivial. Another person is the random number generator. And now this person has a bunch of bowls, and each of these bowls has a different number of little paper slips, so that when they reach into a bowl, they pull out a random number. And this is important as a way of, that this algorithm needs a source of random data, and that's provided by this person with these bowls. And I suggested that maybe there's some like traditional or some nice older bowls that somebody has that could be, kind of make the machine itself aesthetic. Another person is the database searcher, so they're sort of like the search engine or the lookup machine, and that they are then charged with looking up the next word on this table. So when the random number generator says 7 and the last word was from, then they look on this table and they see, the next word is us. So then there's another person. You can see this to the left here, there's a blackboard. That's the rustic display. And so that's the last person who's part of the machine is the terminal display driver. So this person has to then write the words on the display. so that you're sort of developing the poem as it goes on.
So it's really a board game based on 4 people, where each of the person is some kind of doing the tasks that I have in my own computer, because my computer has a screen, my computer has a CPU, my computer has a hard drive where some materials is stored, etc., etc., etc.
Exactly. So in this case, you could make the comparison to something like the person who's the program counter is a bit like the CPU, and then the random number generator is some kind of source of randomness in your computer. Then the database searcher is something like the hard drive, which stores the data, and then or maybe just the memory or whatever. And then the terminal display driver, then this is like the screen. Yeah. So in a way, it's like I don't know. Maybe it seems a little bit didactic, but I always find that's for me one of the pleasures is to reduce these things that we always see as sort of almost magical and high tech to something that's kind of simple, and that we could even do without the machine.
And it also means that at the end, anybody who gets those pages could build that computer and play that computer and write poems or write potential poems from Anna Akhmatova at home.
Sure. And if somebody wants to, they can write a new table and, come up with different poems, or they could maybe change some of the words or something like that, and generate different texts.
Nice. I think because I know that Aleksandr, okay, we're not going to tell what Aleksandr did already, but so that the people understand how we worked on that exhibition, all the artists of the exhibitions in Berlin were asked to prepare 1 to 10 A4 pages of instructions, and they were totally free of the way they made or they designed the instructions. And here you really see how Brendan decided also to play around this, let's say, 19th century aesthetic, before electricity, before Tesla, not Tesla the cars, but the real Tesla, before all the kind of new technologies we know today. So the artist designed those pages, and the process was always that they gave me those pages. We had some conversations, and then I sent the pages to Anastasia, who's also here with us, and who basically got 34 different projects, and she had to deal with them. And now I would like just to hear a bit what was her reaction when she saw those pages from Brendan. And a bit like me also, I didn't really understood anything from those pages when I got them. Anastasia, what was your reaction when you saw that project coming, knowing that after that, you need, of course, to produce the artwork or to find people to help you in the production in Krasnoyarsk? What was your feeling when you saw that project?
I read the instruction, then I read it for the second time again, then I read the translation. It was my third time when I read the instruction, and then I realized that I need to consult a specialist, computer specialist, so they could explain me how it works. And when we started to speak about computer mechanisms and mathematical algorithms, I of course thought about Aleksandr. I knew that Aleksandr would help us, so it didn't take me much time to look for a person who would help me with this instruction. And when I showed it to Sasha, I was surprised by his reaction. He looked at it and said, "Oh yeah, I understand everything." I had read it 4 times before I gave it to Sasha, but Sasha looked at it and he understood everything immediately. Thibaut, your mic is open.
Sasha, what did you understand? Can you explain us what you understood? Okay, and maybe first, Sasha, what are you exactly? That would be nice. So I think you're also a programmer and also an artist. And also then what was your reaction on those instructions?
Actually, I have to say that Brendan is a great person. When I opened the PDF file, I was sure that it was made 15 years ago for sure. I was bought by this design. I thought it was very, very old technology revealed only now. And I learned that it was done not so long ago. And for me, it's a kind of, mismatch. Yeah, bravo, Brendan, really. And that's... yes, there is a very, very smart word there that explains about something obsolete and old-fashioned. And actually, I want to play with it within this theme, in those cups, on the boat, old-fashioned boat, and maybe in an old-fashioned clothes, why not? As for the algorithm itself, everything works perfectly, really. And I work, as you understand, so we need 4 persons, as you understand from the instruction. And if you speak from the techniques point of view, my education is connected with IT. Of course, for me, it was easier to comprehend the algorithm. And if we speak about this, so there is a program counter who follows, who controls the whole program. So it's a holder of the instruction for others, and this person follows the order. And 3 other persons are the functions of this program, which the first person calls. And when I was testing this program, I was that program counter, and I could feel it from inside very properly. And sometimes I was so engaged into this role that when somebody was hiring with the algorithm, I said, no, it's too early. I haven't said you anything yet. It's too early to write and provide some information. I haven't ordered it yet. And in this perspective, the role of the program count is seen the key role to me. And in terms of the functions in the role, we can delegate those roles to our visitors of the exhibition. Because, for example, the random number generator is very easy to be explained. Of course, just a moment. So as for database searcher, for example, it's a little bit more complicated to be explained to the visitors, but still possible. And the display driver is a person who writes so the main idea is to write correctly and beautifully and to match this program count as orders. And as for the exhibition format, we can think that it can lead to mistakes. For example, the random number generator drew their piece of paper not from the cup, not from the needed cup, or the database searcher found a wrong word or sign. But it seems very beautiful to me and very nice, because it's it becomes a show of programming when you could feel it from inside, because the program doesn't always work correctly, and sometimes you may even don't know where is the mistake. And these processes sometimes really illustrates it even more. And what I saw potentially and how it can work. And again, I was fascinated by the whole story. So this is what I think still.
But wait. If I understood right, you've been already running the program. So you already created something. I mean, you read the program, but did you press play on the program, or did you? Can you tell us a bit more on what happened there? I mean.
Yes, sure, I have tried, and I made all these cups for the display, I had a piece of paper, and as far as there were two of us, we delegated two functions per each year, and I was so engaged and involved into the process. We generated two poems, one on the original English table. It was super fast. I don't know what was the magic, but in the Russian language, we generated, it took us about 1 hour with tea break. By the way, those scene moments are also written in the rules, in the instructions of this rustic programming and the instruction, and that the poem that we created, it was actually took several minutes more, and rhythmically it was a poem.
So when you read it aloud, it becomes quite lofty and highbrow. And I have, even now, I have some examples. I can even read them out if you want to. What we have generated in Russian. That's so. It is not the same. It is the same heart, and it is from me. Is if not, it is like this. It really exists now. I think that it's really funny. It has its own rhythm. It's kind of enigmatic rhythm behind it, and it's very cool.
And it really sounds like a poem from Anna Akhmatova, or it sounds like a crazy poem from Anna Akhmatova. I'm not a specialist on Russian poetry, so Nastya, did you read those poems, and can you tell us if it sounds like a poem of Anna Akhmatova?
Yes, it looks like Akhmatova a bit. Sasha, can you read out what you have in English? Of course I can. In English it will sound, as far as I can read in English, it is very laconic. It's very beautiful as well. So you can even find some meaning in this. But somehow in English, I think it's a rather sad poem, but in Russian, it's more kind of merry. It's a happier text.
That probably tells us a lot about the American spirit and the Russian soul. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, maybe Brendan, you have questions to Aleksandr, or the other way around, because I have the feeling you both, of course, share some kind of similar understanding of things we do not understand. I mean, I still have to admit that I don't understand how a computer can work without electricity, and how I can press play without even a button. So I don't know, I think Aleksandr or Brendan, you spoke a bit with each other before, and you had a lot of questions. So should I give you the floor to both, and would like to hear also kind of what are your thoughts or your exchanges on computing, on the history of computers. I don't know, Brendan or Aleksandr, who wants to start?
Well, I could maybe ask or suggest something that we could talk about. That I think for me, one thing when I was learning more, like say, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, learning about this sort of classic period that Thibaut was referencing with this concept here of conceptual art, I was also interested in certain things related to programming, and I think it was really they somehow fit together. Like there's a lot of there's something about certain ideas with programming and with the way you're using language to tell the computer to do something, and then you will make more language to represent the language that you just wrote, and have this kind of almost like this sort of little dolls that you're putting in, nesting dolls of language, that sometimes feels like it could be part of a conceptual artwork. Do you find that in your work? Do you use this kind of, do you apply programming ideas to the your aesthetic or your artistic concepts too?
To me, yes, there is a dialogue between these two things, and I think it's very cool to have a very sudden, like in this situation when you have sudden revelation, you find artists, and then you understand that there is another dimension to this, and that's how it can also work, and you feel not just kind of being alone and isolated in a kind of a niche, but to understand that in the same topic, in the same vein, you have some more artists, and I have this connection, which happened when I saw Brendan's work, and I understood that he uses programming, and the way I use it in my own work, but the principal thing was that irony over or directed towards everything. I really enjoy irony because I think it also has got an interesting feeling inside. You like kind of being nasty in a way, being kind of mischievous. And when you have a means to render this, to convey this feeling and attitude to the spectators, that's great. And programming also enables us to deceive and to cheat on the visitors, because you can play with these patterns which are well established. You use certain things, and then all of a sudden you break these stereotypes. Sometimes you don't even tell the visitors, the spectators, that they have been deceived halfway through. So all this process for me is practically the main thing in what I'm doing. So that's about it. I just wanted to say something, but now I have missed that idea. So if I remember something, I will just pop up again.
Can we consider programming an art?
I mean, I would say it's definitely more art than science. I mean, it's funny. This also, there was a word that came up. It was later, but this terminology where they call software engineering. But software engineering was actually about how you organize, because I think what it was that business people were kind of angry that projects were so confusing, and so they wanted to come up with a sort of scientific or industrial way of organizing making software, so that you should program, you have a big team of people and you write your piece of the program like this and it talks to this, and so they called it engineering. But I think to me that was more about kind of a business thing, and I think I don't know, it's tricky because it is you have, on one hand you have this thing where it's purely mathematical, but then as soon as it goes out into the world it gets really complicated, and to me then it becomes culture, that you have software that people are using. And that's why I think this program here is interesting, because I basically created a situation and sent it out, and it's exciting because what actually is the result depends on a lot on the people who are using it and how they interpret it and how they understand it and what they do with it. And that, for me, that's the fun part, is to see that. And I think that's maybe where, if you're an artist working with software or with things that are interactive, it's quite different from people working with media where maybe the artist usually has more control. I don't know. Do you feel that way, Alex?
Yes. I have a slightly different take on this. When I think about programming in the context of art, I think of it as, first of all, as a tool, which is equal to let's say, paint and brushes. To me, is the same. If it's a tool, then the most important thing in this context is that thanks to this tool, to the use of this tool, we come up with a kind of result. And here, of course, we're approaching a very thin line between what is art and what is not art. But if you are a trickster, to be a cheater to the end, then you can end up saying that a piece of art, or what the artist believes to be a piece of art. So in this situation, I think everything works really well. So it's a seamless, very smooth dovetailing between programming, which is a tool, and here we have a work of art. And go and see that in the exhibition.
But when you mention tools now, it makes me think also about one of those moments where Brendan, also when we were preparing that conversation, you had that sentence on having only one way to do things. And that was something you were trying to fight against, not to just say my tool is a hammer and therefore all the problems that I face are nails. Could you develop a little bit on this story of having one way to do things or tools? I think you have few things that could be interesting on that topic.
Oh, totally. I could talk a lot about that. Certainly, I mean, I think the quote I was saying is that if you only have one way, it was, I don't know, something I was having trouble sharing the PDF with the screen, and I was like, oh, I'll use a different program. I have another one, and then I made this comment that, yeah, if you only have one way to do things, then you might end up being the sort of victim of circumstances. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes I get very political about this, and I don't want to get too much into it today and turn it into that kind of discussion, but that with one of the problems that I see now with the way technology is being applied in the world and the way people are picking it up is that it's based on the idea of having like a product instead of thinking in terms of like an actual technique or of a sort of general purpose tool. You think of the brand name, and so, I mean, maybe even here, that's kind of the case that, people don't think about the fact that there's lots of different ways to, and that's also what I liked about this project, was that there are lots of ways to do artwork with people who are far away. And artists have always come up with really interesting possibilities for sort of collaboration. But some people during this pandemic situation, they were like, yeah, well, we'll just do everything on Zoom, or we'll do everything with, and they think basically the product becomes the limit of their imagination. And so I think when you think more in terms of media and tools as sort of a general purpose, as sort of general categories, rather than a category that is owned by a company that defines the limits of a product, that you're more free to work in different ways and to reframe the possibilities.
Aleksandr, do you feel like adding something to that? You mentioned tools also on your side.
Yes, I can add something. I would look at that from the viewpoint of the developer. And if we come back to this issue of the analog, the metaphor of the hammer and nails, then within the development process, you see that nails are hammered not with a hammer, but with a notebook. If you think about your laptop as a very strong and solid, you can, of course, you can use it to nail your nails. But then your notebook, of course, can be much more complex, but it can also be used as a hammer. And I think that this kind of a tendency, inside tendency, when a very complex, very huge algorithms are used to solve very simple tasks. And of course, the task is solved, but then people don't think about how it's solved. And if you dig deeper, then and you go back to the user, then you have huge applications, huge apps with thousands of functions. Somebody uses them perhaps, but it all brings us to a kind of further complication, slowing down of the process, and everything becomes heavier. Maybe commercially it's huge. It brings lots of money.
Yeah, and this is sad. And in this perspective, this rustic programming is personally for me is a kind of a reminder that we shouldn't drive nails with our notebooks.
Nastya, do you want to add something?
Yeah, it's very hard and difficult to add something, but I will try to ask a question. If there is a possibility in the nearest future that the artificial intelligence will create arts itself and people will be not needed anymore, people will be needed only as spectators and viewers, and artists will be not needed anymore. So I'm a little bit concerned that artificial intelligence will replace both artists and spectators. I think I can start answering this question. As I think and believe, the artificial intelligence is already managing successfully with this. So of course, it's not an example of generation, but as a kind of, in a gallery, there is a service, Archilect or Archilect, and in the aesthetics of the beginning of 2000s or 90s, they collected many pieces and works, and the neural network collects this from the flow of the internet. Or we can remember, for example, any practice on generation of some content, mathematical generation. It's this is what I worked with not that long ago. If you remember Sims 4 computer game, indeed there are many generators and people, both people, cats and dogs. If you set up additional applications that can be used, and when you generate, you receive a ready artwork. Why not? And in this perspective, such utilization of these technologies, I actually like it, and I see some maybe bright future in it because it saves our time. literally, now I can realize thousands of ideas, but not 10, because I use some generators. So it seems to me everything depends on how we use and utilize those, for which purposes and aims, and or if we, or just not use them and reject utilizing them, as in Brendan's instruction in this case. And this moment connected with the development of such great technologies open new doors, additional doors, when on the contrast, it would be great to see when those dogs were not generated in Sims and pictured afterwards, not in small amount, but in thousands, and thousands of those dogs were drawn by hand, manually. So later it can generate and give another layer of works, or maybe another direction for development. So that's why I think this is great, and I want it to develop further and more actively.
So Brendan, are you afraid of artificial intelligence? Will it do artworks instead of you? What's your feeling there?
I mean, I'm not so worried. I mean, it's a bit, to me, it seems more about, I mean, I would even step back and I would say maybe the problem isn't so much with these techniques. The problem has more to do with this terminology that we use, or at least maybe that's the start of the problem, that we call it artificial intelligence. But we don't really know what that is. I mean, there's this sort of fantasy, and like the first people who came up with this word, they had a meeting called the Macy Conference, where these guys, and I think all of them they were all men, and I think all of them are now no longer living. And they thought that within a couple of years that we would have a working AI. But they didn't, I don't think they even defined the word intelligence. And that's the thing, when we say intelligence, it's hard to say what that actually is. And so there were things like, you know, we've got robots that can play chess really well, but chess is a very simple, in some ways a very simple game, because it has a certain number of pieces, a certain number, the field. So it's something that a computer, which is just doing math, is really good at. But if you want, I mean, you can Google for pictures of like accidents with those vacuum cleaner robots, and getting a robot to just walk from one side of the room to the other when there's some stuff on the floor, it's really, really difficult, and they still haven't got it perfected. So I think these ideas of what's intelligence and what's not are maybe where it's more interesting to think about that. And you know, if you gave it a different name, like if you called some sort of image AI that recognizes images, if you called it something like statistical methods for pattern analysis in blah, 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 then no one would be as excited about it. Journalists wouldn't be writing articles about it. But you call it artificial intelligence, and it sounds like a super brain thing, you know, and it has all these science fiction. It's very exciting. And so I think a lot of it has more to do with this fantasy world than actual things that it does. The things that it does are either kind of boring, or sometimes they're even hiding some not so nice business stuff that somebody's using to exploit cheap labor. So that's why I'm not too worried about, I'm more worried about, yeah, the human aspects of it than I am that, I don't know, that next year somebody will write a computer program that will put all the painters out of business. I don't think it will happen.
Nice. So I think we kind of now reaching the end of our 1 hour conversation. What I would like just now to say is, because you mentioned also like generating artworks or projects, Aleksandr is also involved in the project of another artist of the exhibition, Alisa Berger, who went in a much more like internet aesthetic. She's reenacting an internet project of her father that was based on memes and cats and how much the internet loved cats. That you will see also in the exhibition, or you will get hints in the future projects around the story. But if you look for Kotia Coin on Instagram, there's already a few images arriving, and that's another project of the exhibition that exists there on the internet. I will, of course, invite anybody to come to the exhibition. So in 2 weeks and a half, we will open, and I'm sure Aleksandr will be around to help the ones who want to become a computer and to be this kind of CPUs or memories. I'm sure you will be there to teach anybody how to become part of a big machine. And I don't know, I just when you spoke, Brendan and Aleksandr today, it brought back to my memory some anecdote, and I want to use that now as a conclusion. A while ago, I was working a lot on the question of the patent office and what's a patent. And somehow also we can see that the instructions that the artist did in Berlin are some kind of patent that are then constructed by other people, which is more or less a classic industrial way of producing things today. And it was really funny because I spoke with many people at the French patent office, and they often have on a weekly basis, they have the visit of quite old men who are not working anymore, who enjoy some kind of free time, and who have been engineers, maybe like you, Brendan. And those men are obsessed with the idea of inventing something. So they kind of like draw all week long a new invention for how to connect some kind of screws, but that the screws turn in a new way with a new design, etc. And those men are a big problem for the patent office because they come with those kind of crazy invention on a weekly basis. And the poor men, the poor people working at the patent office, they have to find, like, does that exist already? But what is that invention supposed to do? And it's kind of like a totally crazy project. And the people who work at the office, they have a nickname for those crazy inventors. And they name them the artists. When a crazy guy comes to the patent office and says, I have a new invention, the guys are saying, oh, be careful, there is an artist coming here, And they all try not to deal with those papers, which will be impossible, which nobody will understand, and which will drive them mad. It's just an anecdote that I wanted to share with you about what an artist can be in the French patent office. I hope, Brendan, you will not become somebody like that, not running to the German patent office every week with a new invention of yours. Or is that your plan for the future?
I don't know. I mean, I might need a new job soon, so we'll see. But I think, I don't know, patents, they're tricky. It's a lot of work to write those patents. Although it was fun, it was really fun to produce this document. So who knows? Maybe you set me off on the wrong path.
So I thank you all, Nastya. I thank you, Aleksandr. I thank you, Brendan. And see you very soon in Siberia, and follow us on Instagram, on website. There's plenty of things happening and images coming. Follow the Museum Plochatmira, and see you soon. Bye-bye.